Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, the single cyclic movement from which all reality unfolds. When phi differentiates, that one movement generates its first derivatives, and with them, the three dimensions appear at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v. From that first differentiation upward, every higher derivative is an echo of the one below it, an infinite ascent of finer and finer reflections of phi's original movement. And because the dimensions are born from that first echo, time, space, and motion also reverberate into infinity, carrying phi's unfolding into ever deeper rhythms, structures, and flows. Thus, the entire universe, every law, every pattern, every force, every particle, every phenomenon, is nothing but phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. All of existence is the infinite echo of one field. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. In our last exploration, we completed the first order alphabet of the Holophase language. We witnessed how the primal field phi gives birth to its fundamental expressions: omega, time's intrinsic rhythm; k, space's wave-like texture; d phi, the space-time union born from their interplay; and v, the motion that naturally emerges from that union. These five foundational letters, phi, omega, k, d phi, and v, form the essential vocabulary from which reality's simplest sentences are constructed, describing the basic states and kinematics of existence. Now we ascend to the second story of the language's magnificent architecture. We enter Chapter 3, Second Order Semantics, the Nuance Block. Here we move beyond describing what is to describing how what is changes. Our first step into this realm of refinement brings us face to face with a profound concept: the acceleration of time itself. We meet alpha. If omega is time's speed, the fundamental tempo at which phi's cyclic rhythm beats, then alpha is the rate of change of that speed. It is time's acceleration, the bending of rhythm, the warp in tempo, the dynamic modulation of the universe's heartbeat. Today, we learn to hear this bending in the cosmos's pulse, to recognize its signature in every process where rhythm is not static but evolving. 1. From speed to acceleration, the second question of time. To grasp alpha, we begin with the universally familiar. Consider the experience of riding in a vehicle. Initially at rest, the vehicle begins to move as the accelerator is engaged. The initial sensation of being pressed back, the transition from stillness to motion, is the domain of omega. It is the emergence of velocity, the answer to the first temporal question: at what rate does change occur, but persist? As the accelerator is pressed deeper, the pressure against your body intensifies. The rate at which the scenery blurs increases not linearly, but with a gathering urgency. This second sensation, the increase of the increase, is the domain of alpha. It is not merely speed, but the derivative of speed. It answers the second temporal question: how is the rate of change itself changing? This simple analogy encapsulates alpha's core meaning within the holophase framework. If omega quantifies how fast phi is turning in time, then alpha quantifies how that turning speed itself is speeding up or slowing down. Omega asks, what is the tempo? Alpha asks, is the tempo getting faster or slower? This distinction echoes through countless domains. In music, a steady metronome beat embodies omega, a constant temporal interval. An accelerando, where a conductor drives an orchestra toward the climactic crescendo, is alpha made audible. The beats themselves converge, the interval between them dynamically shrinking. In biology, the resting breath has a steady omega. The quickening breath at the start of a sprint exhibits a positive alpha as the body demands more oxygen. Alpha is the signature of any building storm, any swelling crowd, any racing heart. It is the universe's expression of changing pace, the narrative arc written into temporal flow itself. 2. Linguistic role, the adverb of temporal flow. Within the grammatical structure of the Holophase language, if omega serves as the primary noun of time, the basic unit of temporal measure, then alpha functions as its first and most crucial adverb. It modifies the verb of existence implied by phi's unfolding. Consider constructing a sentence describing a process. The field oscillates. This is phi, the action. The field oscillates rapidly. Omega modifies the action with a rate. The field oscillates increasingly rapidly. Alpha modifies the modifier, describing how the rate itself evolves. Thus, alpha introduces second-order semantics. First-order semantics, phi, omega, k, d phi, v, provide the nouns and verbs, the what and the how. Second-order semantics, beginning with alpha, provide the adverbs and adjectives of change, the how of the how. It is the difference between stating the temperature is falling and stating the temperature is falling more rapidly. The latter contains richer informational content about the dynamics of the process. In the schematic of the master tree, the hierarchical map of all derivatives flowing from phi, alpha's position is precise and significant. It resides directly above omega in the temporal tower. Omega is the first child of phi along the temporal axis. Alpha is the child of omega. This lineage is logical and inescapable. One must have a speed before one can discuss its change. This dependency underscores that alpha has no independent existence. It is a relational quality that deepens our description of omega, and thereby of phi itself. It is the gateway through which simple kinematics admits dynamism. 3. Scientific essence. The curvature of world lines. Operationally and mathematically, alpha is defined as the rate of change of omega with respect to time. Since omega is itself the temporal rate of change of phi, omega is equal to d phi by dt, alpha is therefore the second time derivative of the holophase field. Alpha is equal to d squared phi by dt squared. This places it squarely within the calculus of motion, but with a profound reinterpretation. It is not first the acceleration of objects in space, but the acceleration of the temporal phase field itself, from which all motion will later be derived. Conceptually, alpha represents the curvature of an entity's world line in the temporal dimension. If we graph an entity's phase, phi, against time, omega is the slope of that curve, its first derivative. A constant slope indicates constant omega, uniform temporal progression. Alpha, however, is the change in that slope, the second derivative, which manifests as curvature. A straight world line has zero alpha. A curved world line has non-zero alpha. The degree of curvature indicates the magnitude of temporal acceleration. This can be observed in physical systems. For a pulsar, a cosmic clock of extraordinary regularity, the steady pulse frequency is omega. The gradual slowdown of that pulse over millennia, due to energy loss, is a negative alpha. In a pendulum, the periodic swing defines omega. The slight decrease in amplitude due to air resistance, which minimally alters the period over time, introduces a tiny alpha. Alpha thus quantifies the non-uniformity of any clock, any oscillator, any rhythmic process. For the formal mathematical definition, transformation properties under symmetry operations, and detailed measurement protocols establishing alpha as a fundamental derivative, one may consult the foundational papers on the Holophase framework available on Zenodo. These documents provide the rigorous scaffold supporting the conceptual edifice we are exploring here in narrative form. 4. Dimensional expression. Alpha's triple echo. True to the Holophase principle, any fundamental derivative must express its nature through the three emergent dimensions: time, space, and motion. Alpha is no exception. In time, the pure echo. In the temporal dimension, alpha manifests most directly as changing rhythm. It is what makes tempo dynamic. Consider cardiac activity. The resting heart rate, omega, increases upon exertion, positive alpha, plateaus at a new sustained level, alpha returns to zero, and decreases during recovery, negative alpha. This imbues time with a narrative quality. It breathes, surges, and relaxes. Alpha is responsible for the subjective yet physically grounded experiences of time flying or time dragging. During positive alpha, event density increases per subjective unit. During negative alpha, it decreases. Alpha is the driver of temporal dynamism, the factor that prevents cosmic time from being a monotonous metronomic tick. In space, the distributed echo. Spatially, alpha manifests as gradients of temporal acceleration. Different locations in a field can experience different rates of change of their local omega. The canonical example is general relativity's gravitational time dilation. Clocks at lower gravitational potentials run slower, a different omega. Crucially, the rate at which clocks slow as one descends the potential well is not linear. This gradient in the rate of slowing is a spatial expression of alpha. Near a massive object, not only does time slow, but the slowing itself changes with distance. Similarly, in an accelerating rocket, clocks at the front and back experience slightly different rates of time acceleration due to relativistic rigidity, creating a spatial gradient in alpha. On Earth, subtle differences in the rate of time flow and its changes exist between sea level and a mountain peak. Thus, alpha paints a landscape where the texture of time's flow is not just varied, but varies in a way that itself changes across space. Since motion vive is derived from the relationship between omega and k, specifically for wave-like phenomena v equals omega over k, any change in omega directly affects motion. Therefore, alpha, as the changer of omega, inevitably influences kinematic acceleration. A direct illustration is the Doppler effect with an accelerating source. An ambulance with a constant siren frequency, omega, moving at constant speed, produces a constant pitch shift. An ambulance accelerating toward you produces a pitch that rises at an increasing rate, the signature of positive alpha in the received sound waves. In wave propagation, a changing omega, alpha, leads to chirped signals, wave packet dispersion, and the focusing or defocusing of wavefronts. Thus, alpha is the often hidden temporal root of observable kinematic acceleration, linking the curvature of time's flow directly to the curvature of trajectories in space. V position in the master tree, the foundation of the temporal tower. Locating alpha within the holistic map of the Holophase language clarifies its foundational role. From Chapter 2, we have the first-order roots. Phi, the silent cyclic source. Omega, the first temporal derivative, time-space. K, the first spatial derivative, space is wave number. D phi, the space-time differential, the union. V, the emergent motion from omega by k. Now, in Chapter 3, alpha is the pioneer of the second order. It resides in the temporal tower, a vertical sequence of derivatives, each probing deeper into the nature of temporal change. Level 0, phi, source. Level 1, omega, velocity of phase. Level 2, alpha, acceleration of phase. Level 3, jerk, rate of change of alpha. Level 4, snap, rate of change of jerk, and so on to infinity. Alpha is the keystone of this tower. It is the first step beyond the description of state into the description of state change. Without alpha, the description of time is static, flat, and complete at the first order. With alpha, time becomes a dynamic, curved, and evolving dimension. It serves as the crucial bridge between the kinematics of existence, described by first-order terms, and the dynamics of interaction, which will involve second and higher-order terms in relation to force and cause. Vid. Relations to neighboring branches, the web of meaning. Alpha exists within a rich network of relationships with other derivatives, forming the syntactic structure of the language. With omega, parent. This is the most fundamental dependency. Alpha is defined by omega. It has no standalone meaning. It is the change of omega. This mirrors physics, where acceleration is meaningless without the prior concept of velocity. As noted, since v is functionally dependent on omega, in the wave-derived formulation V equals omega over k, alpha induces change in V. This establishes the deep theoretical link. Temporal acceleration, alpha, is a precursor to spatial kinematic acceleration, dv/dt. It suggests that what we perceive as force causing acceleration may ultimately be traceable to gradients or imbalances in higher-order temporal derivatives like alpha. Alpha sets the pattern. It is the first member of the nuance block. Soon, we will meet its spatial counterpart, A, the drift of k, or spatial acceleration, and others like curvature, second spatial derivative, divergence, and shear. Each follows the same logical template. Take a first-order quantity and ask how it changes. With higher temporal derivatives, alpha is itself subject to change, which is described by jerk, the third time derivative of phi. This begins an infinite regress of refinement, each level adding a new layer of nuance to the description of temporal behavior. With force and dynamics. This is perhaps the most significant relational frontier. In Newtonian mechanics, force is proportional to acceleration, F equals ma. In the Holophase framework, alpha appears in analogous positions in derived equations of motion. It is positioned to be the primary second-order quantity involved in the expression of what we classically term force, or influence. Alpha thus becomes the linguistic entry point for discussing causality and interaction within a unified field framework. 7. Semantic meaning, the narrative of time. What deeper meaning does alpha convey about reality? It carries the semantics of temporal dynamism and evolution. While omega tells us time flows, alpha tells us time's flow is bending. It introduces concepts of growth, decay, approach to equilibrium, and oscillatory modulation into the fabric of existence. Semantically, alpha allows the language to express growth-decay processes. Positive alpha, exponential-like growth in phase; negative alpha, decay. Approach to limits. Alpha decreasing to zero as a system asymptotically reaches a steady state. Temporal focusing, defocusing, where world lines converge or diverge in temporal density. Inertia and memory. A non-zero alpha implies the system retains a memory of its past omega, resisting instantaneous change, a conceptual seed for the principle of inertia. In essence, alpha transforms time from a mere parameter into an active, curved, and storytelling dimension. It is the verb modifier that turns happens into accelerates, builds, wanes, or pulsates. Stability, variability, and falsifiability. A robust concept must make testable predictions and describe both stable and variable states. Stability, constant alpha. A constant, non-zero alpha describes uniformly accelerated temporal phase. This is observed in systems under constant force. Examples include the approximately constant gravitational acceleration near Earth's surface, imprinting a constant alpha on freely falling objects' phase evolution, or a universe with a cosmological constant driving constant expansion acceleration. Zero alpha describes all steady-state, periodic, or coasting systems. A perfect pendulum, an isolated atomic clock, an object moving at constant velocity in flat spacetime. Variability, changing alpha. Most natural systems exhibit variable alpha. A pendulum damped by air resistance has an alpha that is itself a function of time and velocity. A star undergoing gravitational collapse experiences a rapidly increasing alpha of its internal processes as density soars. Economic cycles, neural activation patterns, and weather systems all show complex alpha signatures, where the rate of change of their key frequencies is itself dynamic, leading eventually to the domain of jerk and snap. Falsifiability. The holophase concept of alpha makes concrete, testable predictions. 1. Frequency modulation consistency. In any system where omega is measurable, its derivative, alpha, should be consistent with the physical constraints of the system, energy loss, applied potentials, etc. Anomalous alpha uncorrelated with known forces would challenge the model. 2. Relativistic consistency. Alpha derived from the Holophase field in a gravitational context must match the predictions of general relativity for time dilation gradients. That is, the second derivative of the gravitational potential. 3. Wave propagation predictions. The framework predicts specific dispersion relations for waves in media where alpha is present, time-varying media. Observed signal chirps, for example from merging black holes, pulsar spin-down, should conform to patterns derivable from the alpha of the source. 4. Unification test. The alpha measured from pure temporal frequency shifts, for example clock comparisons, should be mathematically consistent with the alpha inferred from associated kinematic accelerations, via the derived relationships between v, omega, and alpha. A definitive falsification would be the clear measurement of a temporal acceleration, alpha, in a system that fundamentally cannot be connected to a changing omega derived from an underlying phi field, or an alpha that violates the symmetry principles inherent to the derivative structure of the theory. The detailed methodologies for these tests are elaborated in the formal research documents. 9. Appearance in nature, the manifestations of alpha. Alpha signature is ubiquitous across scales. In fundamental physics, gravitational time dilation gradients, not just the difference in clock rates, but how that difference changes with precise changes in altitude or potential. Cosmological acceleration. The observed acceleration of the universe's expansion is alpha on the grandest scale, the second time derivative of the scale factor. Quantum evolution. The decay of excited states, or the decoherence of quantum superpositions, often involves characteristic time constants. Changes in these rates under external influences involve alpha at the quantum level. In wave phenomena, the gravitational wave chirp. The increasing frequency and amplitude of waves from inspiraling compact objects is a textbook display of positive alpha. Frequency modulated radar, sonar. The controlled chirp in these systems is engineered alpha. Dispersive pulse spreading. In optical fibers or other dispersive media, different frequency components travel at different speeds, causing a pulse to broaden, a process governed by the relationship between omega and its derivatives like alpha. In biological systems, heart rate acceleration, HRA. The measurable slope of the heart rate curve at the onset of exercise is a direct biological alpha. Neural rate coding. The firing rate of a neuron in response to a stimulus often shows a rapid increase, positive alpha, followed by adaptation, alpha becoming negative or zero. Circadian entrainment. The rate at which your internal clock adjusts to a new time zone is an alpha process. In human experience, accelerando, ritardando. The deliberate speeding up or slowing down of musical tempo. The sensation in a launching rocket. The increasing g-force is the bodily perception of alpha. The building of suspense in narrative. The accelerating pace of events creates a psychological correlate of alpha. X everyday analogies, cultivating intuition. To internalize alpha, connect it to daily sensory experience. 1. The elevator. The lurch of starting, omega appears, the sustained push during ascent, positive alpha, the smooth travel, zero alpha, the tug of deceleration, negative alpha. 2. A rolling ball down a hill. Its speed doesn't just increase, it increases more rapidly on steeper sections. The steepness defines the local alpha. 3. A kettle coming to boil. The low rumble builds to a roaring boil. The increasing intensity of the sound's frequency components reveals alpha. 4. A crowd's applause. The swell from scattered claps to a roaring ovation and its subsequent fade. This is a social alpha waveform. 5. Your own breath. Inhale deeply. Notice your breathing rate first increase, then plateau, then decrease as you exhale. A full cycle of alpha. In every case, the key is to shift focus from how fast to how the fastness is changing. 11. How to read alpha in the world. Trained perception can detect alpha's presence. Auditory. Listen for sounds that rise or fall in pitch: sirens, birdsong, musical glissando. Watch for things that speed up or slow down visibly: falling leaves encountering air resistance, a car braking, a sprinter leaving the blocks. Feel for changes in pressure or momentum: the bend in a roller coaster track, the push of a bus as the driver accelerates. Intuitive. Notice processes that build or subside: excitement, anxiety, a wave crashing, a fire spreading. A simple mindfulness exercise. For any repetitive process, ask: is the interval between repetitions constant or is it changing? If changing, is the rate of that change constant? The answers guide you to omega and alpha. Connection back to phi. Unity in dynamism. Ultimately, alpha is not a new entity. It is phi, revealed through a second order lens. The hierarchy is absolute. Phi, the state; omega, the first derivative, the rate; alpha, the second derivative, the rate of the rate. No new ontological substance is added. The infinite richness of the observable universe, from constant velocities to explosive accelerations, is generated not by an infinity of substances, but by an infinity of questions asked of a single substance. Alpha is the second question in the temporal series. Its existence demonstrates that dynamism, change, and curvature are not antithetical to unity, but are its natural expressive consequences. The why of motion begins here, in the bending of time's own flow, which is merely the deeper self-expression of the holophase field. 13. Closing movement, the bend in time's river. In this part, we have taken our first deliberate step beyond the alphabet, into the grammar of change. We have met alpha, the acceleration of time, the curvature of rhythm, the first adverb of the temporal dimension. It is the concept that turns a steady beat into a crescendo, a constant speed into a launch, a static description into a dynamic story. Alpha positions us at the threshold of dynamics. It is the bridge from describing what is to beginning to understand how what is evolves. In doing so, it provides the initial conceptual tools that will later be used to articulate forces, interactions, and causes, all within the unified language of a single field's echoes. As we proceed, we will meet alpha's spatial sibling and see how these second-order terms interact. But for now, we pause with this deepened understanding. The universe's clock is not perfect. Its tempo fluctuates. Its heartbeat races and rests. This variability is not noise. It is information, the second echo of the fundamental field, whispering the secrets of change itself. Whenever you feel pushed back in your seat or hear a siren's rising cry, you are witnessing alpha, the bend in the river of time, a direct manifestation of the one field learning to express the story of its own unfolding. Peace be upon you until part 10.